I use words like ultimate very carefully. A little while ago, my buddy Paul Mayette posted a picture of a sawhorse that had pipe clamps in it for adjustable height. I thought it was a really cool idea. We started discussing it. We saw some flaws in the design. My buddy Tim Warren jumped in, some other people, and we kind of came up with this idea sort of collaboratively that I made a prototype of how to make the ultimate adjustable sawhorse. The basic idea I'll show you right now is that if you want to adjust the pipe clamps, you need two hands and a third hand to go up and down, but this foot lever takes care of that. And I have some other tricks up my sleeve for this one too. So check out the video and I'll show you how I made them. It's pretty easy. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you what I did wrong and because they are just prototypes and how they could be better and what you could do better if you wanted to make these. Oh, and if you're wondering about the paint scheme, that's just for the thumbnail because I'm sure some people are going to hate it. I had a couple specific needs and uses I wanted to make my sawhorses for. One of them is I want to be able to get nice and low to go to my metal cutting bandsaw, which is down low. And this works. And I also want to be able to get up to my tailgate of my truck, which is probably around here, and all the way up to my workbench, which is a little higher. So this goes to all the heights that I need. I also wanted it to be low, so you know sometimes you're like trying to finish or sand like a box or a cabinet or something, and up on your workbench it's too high, and if you put it on the ground it's too low. Well, now you can put it on these and it's just the right height. But we don't want to mess up my beautiful pink paint job, right? The idea is that there's inserts that go on top of these. This particular insert's designed to hold these Rockler bench cookies. If you're going to use the sawhorses to cut, you want a waste board to cut into that doesn't destroy your sawhorse. Maybe you don't use Rockler products. You could just use, this is just a piece of wood with some non-skid shelf paper on it you could use. And then I was even messing around with the idea of putting a roller so I could put that up next to my chop saw. And this is obviously not a functioning roller, but it's just the idea. So the sky's the limit for what you can do with these. I made these all from some scrap 2x4s and reclaimed wood, a piece of scrap plywood. I did have to buy one 2x4 to have enough to make them. And you see here, I set up my chop saw next to my table saw so I can use that fence when I have to do repetitive cuts, because I didn't want to build a whole miter station. I just don't use the saw all that often. But I started by cutting the legs to about 23 inches, and then I found an angle by just eyeballing them of where I thought would be a good angle for these, and that was around 13 degrees, I believe. So I transferred the angle over to the chop saw and cut them all like that, and I did both ends that way. Then using a piece of the scrap cutoff, I set up this little fence and I was able to just easily level out the top. So now when I put them up against the side rail, you can see how they angle in flush and everything's all mathematically correct. It was actually relatively simple that way. There's that piece of scrap plywood I used to make the sides. So I just assembled these like a typical sawhorse here on the bottom. Nothing fancy. I didn't use any glue. I just put it all together with screws to make sure I could take it apart again if I needed to make some adjustments, because I was, prototyping. And I was actually really happy that I was able to get enough to make 4 sides or for 2 sawhorses out of that one piece of wood. I transferred that same angle over to my table saw miter, and I was able to just follow the lines I'd traced out pretty quickly and easily and make those 4 side pieces that hold the whole thing together, really. I drilled 2 holes in the top piece of 2x4 for the pipes, and then 2 holes for that foot mechanism I'm going to make later. I used my square to help me lay out some pre-drilled holes so I could screw it all together, and then that was pretty much the next step, was assembly before getting to the complicated stuff of making it work. Oh, I did give it just a real rough, just quick sanding, just because 2x4s are kind of garbagey like that. I have all these paints left over from a job I did a while ago, and I was looking through them to pick a color to paint the sawhorses, and I decided to just paint them all the colors. I thought it would be fun. So while the paint's drying, I can go into the metalwork. I just pulled this piece of, it was about a 1 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch thick bar. I'm not really sure exactly what it was, and I had some scraps of these little sort of a round stock that you can see here. So the idea was I had 2 square stalks up top, 2 square stalks on the bottom, the round bars in the middle, and then I have the pipes and the pipe flanges to make the clamp mechanism. Now I need just half of a pipe clamp, just the spring locking half, and I only had 2 in the shop, so I went and I bought 2 more at the cheap store. I drilled a couple holes in each one of those clamp parts so I could screw it into the wood that is the top part of that sawhorse. And then I started to assemble. So I drilled out one of my sides, and I used that as a template to drill out all my sides. And it was just really a matter of screwing it together like a basic sawhorse. Now here's where I wasn't quite sure how things were going to work out. I just started by simply screwing the pipe clamps on and trying them to see what would happen. These new pipe clamp connectors I bought at Harbor Freight, you can see the pipe is pretty straight. It still kind of has a slight angle to it. I think perfectly straight would be right about there. But this older style that I have, it says Pony on it for the brand. It looks like a Jorgensen or something. You see it has this very rakish angle to it. So in order for this to work properly, I need to set it straight like that so the pipe goes straight up and down the hole and it all lines up. Mr. Chisel made quick work of that. I simply kept eyeballing it and lowering one side until it looked like it was pretty straight. And then I tried that. Once I was satisfied that the pipes were straight enough and they seemed to move properly, I set up the solid steel bar across the top to touch both of the spring clamps at the same time. I clamped it in place, quickly tacked those two downward rods onto it, and then I pulled it out of the sawhorse and then finished welding them. But I didn't want to weld the bottom bar on because then it would be stuck on there and I wouldn't be able to take it off. So I drilled some holes and I threaded a tap into the bottom rod so that way I could just screw that on. No one could see the screws, and that I can take it apart and take the whole sawhorse apart if I needed to work on it. Especially because it's a prototype, I just didn't know what was going to happen. You could do the whole system with just thread locker, screws, and a tap, but you don't need a welder at all to make these. The pipe clamps are designed to where you can go one direction without releasing the spring mechanism, which is up in this case, and then you need to push it to make it go down. But if you try to lift it up, the whole sawhorse lifts up because it's kind of light, so that foot release actually helps you go both directions. He just kind of keeps it still, and you can see it's holds my 200-pound self. I made this real simple template to line up holes in between the top of the sawhorse and the bottom of the pieces that will attach to it. So I put dowels through the attachment pieces into the holes that are now into the top of the sawhorse, you'll see later. And I also drilled these big circles to hold those Rockler bench cookies in one of them. These are the dowels now. I'm going to pop them through the other pieces of what I have that are going to be the waste surfaces and the paint surfaces that go on top of the sawhorses. There you can see I'm just pounding them through the top because they don't have to look pretty. It was just easy, and then they slide right in. I didn't film it, but obviously I used those pipe flanges in the pink bar that's on the top. I screwed those in so I could thread the rods in, and that's really all there was to it. It is a little bit tricky to line these up, and then on this one I used some Harbor Freight pipe clamps that worked great and they were easier to install, but now they don't work quite as well, and you can see it'll slide a little bit. So to recap, if you want to try to make these on your own, they're not that difficult. I think that all the instructions are pretty easy to follow along in the video. I would recommend getting the best pipe clamps you can get. Don't get the cheap ones. And it does take a little bit of time finagling, so be patient and understand that every pipe clamp might be a little different. Also, if you're going to make the tops that I have that go in and out, I'd recommend drilling the holes a little deeper for your plugs to go in, or making them a little tighter, or just screw the darn thing on. I mean, it is a sawhorse at the end of the day. Thank you very much for watching. You can like, share, and subscribe, and you can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/timsway, where I create additional content for my patrons, as well as early previews of things, and sometimes I give stuff away. Alright, thanks a lot. Be good. You dare me to write it down? I'm scared.